Discover the best in local business news with a subscription to the IBJ and Inside Indiana Business. For a limited time, try us out for just $1 a week for 8 weeks. Claim this limited time offer now at ibj.com/trial offer.
Welcome back to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Maura Johnson, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Barnes Thornburg partner Brian McGinnis to break down the Trump administration's latest efforts and the ongoing discussion surrounding the regulation of artificial intelligence in the United States. Last month, the White House released the National AI Legislative Framework, a set of guidelines designed to act as a policy roadmap for federal AI regulation moves by Congress. The administration has been a staunch supporter of enforcing federal-led AI regulation over individual state-sanctioned law and placing minimally burdensome interventions on the technology's developments. McGinnis is co-chair of Barnes Thornburg's Artificial Intelligence Practice Group and a member of the firm's Internet and Technology practice, with nearly 20 years of experience at the intersection of technology and the law. I personally think AI regulation is really interesting, so I was really excited to talk to Mr. Guinness about the administration's latest move and how lawmakers in general are trying to stay one step ahead of this rapidly developing technology. I hope you enjoyed the episode, but before we get into it, let's hear from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
So just to start out, obviously this framework, it's really not that long. It has like 6 points, 3 pages, but can you just give me, I guess, a quick overview of what it's talking about? What are the big points that it's making?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for inviting me to join and have this conversation. But this is the most recent development in Trump's AI rollout that really began shortly after he took office, January 2025, where they kind of did some policies or at least some statements, executive orders that had been issued by the Biden administration that was attempting, in the Biden case, to slow down some of the development of AI, arguably, and argue for more regulation and control over the way it rolled out. The business community had sort of opposed that approach and was looking to deregulate or avoid getting too many regulations to allow for the, sped up development of AI systems and technology as a whole. There's some really interesting arguments around national security and really a need to develop these things as quickly as possible with as little interference as possible, with people comparing this to things like certainly security challenges, national security challenges, but also like the space race of who's going to get to the moon first. And the way that the businesses position it, the developers of these frontier AI models, is more along the lines of we have to be a leader, global leader in this. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind. People are doing this around the world. If we're not the ones that are leading in it, then we're falling behind and potentially at risk, including potentially at national security risk. And so that started to take shape shortly after the current administration took office. The most recent development here was just a few weeks ago, March of 2026, that started to put what they call the AI framework into clearer focus, with the ultimate goal being for Congress to pass a law, and hopefully a federal law, obviously, that governs the development, creation of AI and sort of the use of AI by various companies across the country as a singular standard, as opposed to the alternative, which is looking like it potentially could be a whole lot of different state laws that try and govern AI, but do so in a different way that creates obviously a lot of difficulties for those businesses that are building it. So that's really what is at stake. The approach that they took was to outline 6 key objectives for Congress to address in any kind of law. There's things in there about protection, such as protection of children. So like some age assurance requirements, and making sure that they're taking care of younger people who are using these systems. And so the result of the lead up for the Trump administration was to create what they're calling the AI legislative framework. And really, this is a blueprint that, or a wish list of what they want to see from a federal law from Congress They approached it by laying out 6 key objectives. Those are protecting children. So obviously, there's been a lot of conversation around kids and minors using various AI technologies like character.ai and other things like that, chatbots and the like. And so they'd like to see some protections in there for younger people who are using these. Around strengthening communities, focusing on economic growth, energy dominance, and calling for streamlining permitting so that data centers can generate power on site and ensure that residential rate payers aren't being the ones that are getting stuck to foot the bill for all the infrastructure. So basically making it easier to build out the infrastructure for AI. IP rights, intellectual property rights, and creators. So this is sort of seeking a balance between AI using copyrighted work, for example, or other protected intellectual property for training of models, creating new models, et cetera, and considering that a fair use and not making the AI builders subject to potential IP infringement lawsuits for the use of content that they've scraped from the internet, for example. Another one of the 6 pillars is preventing censorship. So this is trying to defend free speech, not letting AI systems be built in such a way that they overly filter the speech that individuals are engaging in. And then the last 2 are in enabling innovation. So this is part of what we discussed about unlocking the speed at which AI can grow, getting Congress to participate by removing older or what they would consider to be burdensome regulation that might get in the way of building AI systems as quickly as they can. And then also some workforce provisions about building and targeted towards creating an AI-ready workforce in this country to help support the industry. So that's their wish list of what they want to see within a law, but ultimately the next step, it's going to be up to Congress to have to get together and hash out how that law is going to look in reality, gain support for it, and get something passed. And in the meantime, we have this ongoing conversation and ongoing conflict with the states who want to pass their own laws that potentially provide higher level standards than whatever Congress comes up with might.
And obviously, this is, like you said, the wish list of what, the administration wants. Is that, I guess, unusual to come out with something like this where it is a wish list of kind of what they desire from Congress? Is it normal to put that in front of like the public, I guess, just to assess maybe?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's unusual. Certainly, you've got all sorts of lobbying and policy conversations happening on the Hill all the time on all sorts of different issues. I think in this case, the administration has been really clear about where they fall in the position and what they want to see in any kind of legislation and made it clear that anything that falls short of that isn't going to be something that they support. So certainly part of guiding the conversation towards where they want it to go, which again is very sort of in the favor of developers of AI systems and the businesses that are trying to build these things out. So I wouldn't say it's a unique situation, but certainly one where they're being particularly aggressive.
Yeah. Is there anything of the kind of 6 points from your perspective working at the intersection of AI and the law? Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you about the wish list that maybe is, I don't know, unusual or kind of something that it might be hard pressed to get Congress to move forward with?
I think it's the speed question and the preemption question are really the key points, and those kind of go together, right? So, some things about protecting children, I think everybody can get to agreement ultimately on those kinds of things. We should develop these in such a way that they can be controlled, that they're safe, that they're not sort of needlessly harming people. But the questions around whether the states should be able to pass higher standards or more onerous requirements on AI developers, certainly there's a lot of folks that oppose that kind of an approach and believe that it should be left more up to the states, and states should have a bigger hand in deciding what's best for the people in their territories and jurisdictions about, I guess, what AI or the way that AI should be built, right? But the problem on the other side for the businesses is, in addition to the speed and wanting to be there first and have as little regulation as possible, which again is kind of a common refrain from business leaders, there's also the difficulty of trying to build these systems, which are inherently all over the place all at once, in a way that is able to take into account where the individuals are located and provide different standards for individuals depending upon what state's borders they happen to be within. So it's a real challenge there. But I think that's really the focus of this framework and why they're getting there. Some of those others, I think, are easy parts to include, things like the protection of children and making sure we've got AI ready workforce and those kinds of more policy driven things. But the existential question is really, should we what is the government's role in building out AI systems? And it should be done in a way that maximizes speed and achievement and getting these things as far as we can as possible? Or are you more on the naysayer side where you think we should slow down, regulate these, make sure that we're doing this in a safe way because you're somebody who maybe has more fear of the possibilities of AI in a negative way as opposed to positive?
Mhm. And going back to what you were saying about, I guess the former administration's stance on it versus now, would you say that this is more lax in terms of enforcement just because they are pushing for development and those businesses to push ahead?
Yeah, it's certainly more business friendly. So we're not even really to the enforcement phase. First, this is more of a framework. It's a policy. It's a set of wishes into what ultimately becomes a law, and then the enforcement will come after we get to that point. The states, I think, Colorado being the leader, California, Texas, some other states have some laws that have made efforts towards trying to regulate this. Certainly, of those initial states that have already passed laws and are rolling those out, I think you see a much higher standard and a much less AI developer friendly sort of set of regulations. So when it comes to enforcement with those kinds of things, the restrictions on the development are certainly much higher at what's coming out at the state level, which I think really spooks the AI leaders and the federal government, at least this particular administration, in terms of the way that should be approached. So the framework goes a long way towards trying to fight against that. And in fact, they've tasked the Department of Justice with going out and trying to prevent state regulators from passing additional laws that they would view to be against what they're trying to accomplish in the AI framework.
Yeah. Which I think the kind of push and pull between should it be up to the federal government, should it be up to states is interesting just because I think there's probably valid arguments on both sides. Can you talk through that? The pros and cons, I guess. And I know obviously state borders, when you get thrown into that, it's difficult for businesses, but
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So this is an issue that exists in lots of different areas. I think in my mind, I think about it in terms of like a highway system. So the states should say, or the states often say, this is on our land, this is our territory. We're responsible for protecting the people within our state, within our borders. That's our primary care, and what the speed limit should be in Montana is maybe different than what it is in Indiana for all sorts of different reasons: population, geography, general mindset of the type of people who tend to live there. But then you've got the need for interstate travel on an interstate, and you've got people crossing the country, and it would be really impractical to, let's say, for semis, have a set of regulations that make it effectively impossible for somebody to drive a singular semi from coast to coast across these various states because the laws are so different that they're perhaps not able to successfully make it through one of the states because they have to build it to meet some lower requirements or stricter requirements, whatever the case is. So it's similar in that way, the way that state rights play out with respect to the development of AI, in that the arguments on the states are we should be able to control this. We should be able to, I guess, reflect the will of the people that live within our state and what we think is the right decision for us, for this state, for the people that live there in terms of the protections. Maybe we deprioritize business in favor of greater personal privacy or greater IP protections for the types of businesses that we have here. Whereas the federal government comes in and says, well, look, it's really difficult for these companies to be able to do what they need to do to get to the point of having these fully developed AI systems that are able to provide all the benefits that AI potentially promises to people. If we have these people going through this stop-start traffic of various state laws that make it too difficult to really practice this thing on a wider basis, whether that's national or even international. Good arguments on both sides, certainly. And somewhere in the middle, I think, is a compromise solution that'll have to come out of this. The question then becomes, okay, we've got at least the federal law. Let's say we get to the point, hopefully, of having some kind of a law. Then can states pass things on top of it? Is this a ceiling? Is this a floor? There's a lot of conversation to be had there. On the privacy side of things, with respect to privacy law, that's not a situation that they've been able to come to terms with yet. We still don't have a national privacy law, even after years of trying to get it. So really difficult conversations and difficult to gain consensus because there are really good arguments on both sides, I think.
Yeah. Well, and something that I think that we've talked about is just this idea of regulation in general, just because AI is developing at such a rapid pace. Is this framework anticipating that and looking ahead at how do we go about this wish list while also respecting the fact that this technology is hard to get a hold of? And once you pass a law, AI could be surpassed what the law says.
Yeah, I think you have to anticipate how quickly things are moving, but I think the general tenor of the framework is that things aren't moving fast enough, and that there's already too many restrictions, too many regulations, or at least potential for regulation in the form of the state laws that are going to get in the way of allowing us to move as quickly as we think that we need to move to be able to get these systems built out. And the most popular argument I think that I hear is leaning on the national security aspects of that. There's some real fear, maybe genuine, of folks who are saying, if we don't build this as quickly as possible, if we're not the leader in the world in this, that just leaves the door open for other countries that maybe don't have our same values, don't have our same interests, to go out there and really get one over on us as a country by building out their own systems and taking actions that are going to really prevent us from ever potentially succeeding in the space. And being second place, third place, fourth place in this is not an outcome that I think would leave you feeling incredibly safe. So from a government standpoint, I get it. From a sort of a federal government and what their considerations are, obviously the business elements of building this and making it as good as possible and profitable as possible, and all that goes into it as well. But the people on the other side, I think, are largely looking at this from the standpoint of, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where this is going to go. We don't know how quickly it's going to get there. And there's a real fear, and I think a genuine fear of a lot of people, of, if we build this too quickly without appropriate guardrails in place, we may not be able to put the horse back in the barn. We may not be able to fix that. And so there's some legitimate concerns on that side as well.
Yeah. Something that stood out to me in the framework, I think it's point 5, and it just talks about Congress says should not create any new federal rulemaking body to regulate AI. What are your thoughts on that in terms of controlling the regulation of the U.S.?
Yeah, and I think the fear there is probably not wanting this to become a political conversation. Like, if our federal plan is changes every 4 years or every 8 years based on who's holding office, I think that could obviously have some difficulty in terms of long-term viability of pushing forward, and the sort of the way that we're able to develop these systems in a smart way that makes sense on the whole. But getting consensus on what that looks like is obviously going to be extremely difficult. So it seems that the voices that have won out in preparing this framework are very much in favor of less regulation, probably across the board. And this would be something that certainly would fall into that. So if you've got a federal agency whose sole purpose is to really regulate AI, I think that just smacks of additional regulation, which is what they're trying to clear the decks of. And so certainly there's a need for enforcement, and anything that does come out of Congress will have enforcement elements to it. But the idea, I would hope and I would think, is to make it that as least political as we can, to allow the development to go forward however we decide as part of this process at the end that it should.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of in the rulemaking body to regulate AI, has me thinking of this, where I feel like it would be smart to have people in charge who understand the pros and cons of AI and are the ones that are leading the charge in terms of how do we regulate this appropriately, while also, like you said, a balancing act of keeping in mind how do we move ahead as a country, but also not completely let the horse out of the barn and have no control over it.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And so it seems that those making the business argument have really won out here. And again, we heard the same argument on the privacy law side of we can't have a patchwork of 50 different state laws, even though we already have 20-ish that regulate privacy in slightly different ways that make it really difficult to operate a national company. But it's sort of it's clear to me that from the framework, the companies that are building these frontier models and really pushing the development of AI, and will continue to do so in the future, have the ear of the current administration in terms of where they want to set the needle on regulation, and that being less regulation. The other perspective, though, when you speak to researchers, when you speak to individuals, perhaps, there is a lot of, I think, genuine concern over the speed that we're moving. There's a lot of concern about all the things that could go wrong. And the problem is, I think, because of the speed and because of the potential for things going wrong, the speed at which things go wrong is only going to be increased and go potentially quite quickly. And so what those individuals would want, I assume, is more time to be able to research this, to be able to test and those kinds of things, to make sure that they're reducing those risks as much as possible. But I think the other side, the business side primarily, or the more pro AI side or development side anyway, would be we don't have that time available to us. We have to go as quickly as we can. Otherwise, we're going to lose this race. And the consequences of that aren't something that we're willing to accept.
Yeah. I know that some other countries that began developing AI regulations, some are pretty strict, some not so much. Is there anything that we can maybe take from those, what we've seen so far, those examples that could inform us in a positive way?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest and still I think the most important in the world is the EU AI Act out of the EU. And again, to compare it to the development of privacy law, very similarly, you had the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, where the EU came out with really a pretty stringent set of regulations about the collection, use, and sharing of people's personal information. We saw that in the US, took a look at it and said, no, that's too much. California got out of the gates first on the privacy side and passed the California Consumer Privacy Act back in 2020, the CCPA, that was closer to the GDPR than many, or actually all, I would say, of the states that came after it in terms of passing privacy laws. So if you learn from that, and I see a lot of corollaries between the privacy law rollout and the AI law rollout, the US position is almost certainly that the EU AI Act goes too far in regulating these. And the sort of the US mentality here is going to be, we cannot have as many regulations as the EU would want to put on its companies, on its businesses, on its economy for the development and rollout of this. So I expect the result here is going to be similar, where it can be informed by what they're doing, but I wouldn't expect it to go to the same extent, same lengths, or have as stringent requirements that make it difficult for businesses, make it difficult to develop these things as EU would. Really, most of the rest of the world, though, tends to look more towards and tends to be more similar towards the EU legal system than the US legal system. So I would expect you'll have others that'll follow more closely that EU model, but that's not something that I've seen in my space, at least with the US.
Yeah. So what is the timeline on this? I know that the White House seems to obviously want to move this forward as quickly as possible, but in terms of practicality, how fast can Congress work through this, and what are those next steps for them?
That's a great question. If I had a magic ball to say what Congress is going to do, we'd be in a different spot right now. It's really difficult, though. Obviously, they've got quite a lot of other things on their plate, but I do think this is a priority, and much more so, it seems now, than any kind of privacy law was previously, to get that finished. But again, the time, I think, is one of the central issues here. You've got a real urgency to build this stuff out. You've got a real need, if you are going to regulate it, to start doing that soon. Sooner rather than later. And so I do expect that this is going to have to move much more quickly. Again, the speed using AI has really just picked up here, really even in the last couple of months. And I think that's only going to continue to be the case as we move forward. This is a right now issue. This isn't something that's happening in the future. I think a lot of people hear AI and have funny stories about how it didn't give a good answer, or I was able to convince it of one thing or the other. But I think when you really talk to the smart people in this space who are more aware of what's being developed and how it's being utilized and what the potentialities are of the technology, I think you see them really taking a hard look at this and understanding that things are going to start changing here and change pretty quickly. And so I think any kind of legal work that goes along with that is going to have to follow suit. In terms of legal timing, the Colorado's law was supposed to go into full effect earlier, but they ended up delaying it a bit because of a lot of pushback. And so now you're looking at a June deadline for enforcement of that law. So in a time frame where you've got the framework out there, you've got Congress potentially considering various AI bills. Senator Blackburn released one just before the Trump AI framework was released that may or may not end up getting passed. They're working on those laws, but then you've got this ticking clock down towards this June deadline of Colorado going into full force. So I'd expect quite a lot of litigation between now and then. The states potentially, or they seem to have rallied around wanting to protect those states' rights and their ability to pass more stringent laws. And then you've seen the federal government react to those. And I think we're going to be looking at several really important lawsuits about who ultimately is going to have the control and the upper hand in this, as we hopefully in parallel are trying to come together on a final version of what will ultimately become a federal law. It's difficult for businesses to operate right now, not knowing what the future is going to hold with respect to these laws, what's going to be required of them, how they're going to get there, what the timeline is on those things. So we are in a holding pattern with companies trying to figure out how to work through all of these things while also still operating a business. So hopefully we get to the end point here pretty quickly. Yep. But I think we've got a lot of conversation, a lot of debate, and a lot of litigation between now and then, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and some of it feels like it could turn on a dime. Some of it is a little bit slower.
Yeah, that's right. And you never know too, right? So I think, in my view, obviously the companies that are building the biggest and most well-known AI systems, I think, are obviously heavily behind these conversations and seem to have the ear of the current administration right now. We've seen from other areas that could change at any time. But I don't think in this particular case, they're going to go away from that position of less regulation is a good thing. But if this does end up dragging on and you get a new administration in, may have very different views. And then you get into the situation of trying to regulate things that have been left unregulated for a while. That's going to be a really difficult spot.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, you've got economies that are sitting and waiting and trying to figure out how to continue to do business in a world where they're not sure exactly what's required of them on this. That's the other thing that always bugs me and bugs our clients. I'm here, I'm trying to do business. I want to be compliant. I want to do the right thing, but nobody can give me a straight answer for what I'm actually required to do. So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah.
And so you really leave companies in a situation where they have to do their best to comply with sort of the general principles of this, or target things like the NIST framework as sort of proxies for a law that doesn't yet exist. So interesting spot for them to be in.
Yeah, I would imagine they're walking on eggshells trying to figure out what to do, not to do.
Yep. So some direction.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. To find out more about what's happening in the legal profession across the state, you can head over to our website at theindianalawyer.com. There you'll find more episodes of the Indiana Lawyer Podcast and episodes from podcasts across the IBJ Media Network. You can also find stories from our fellow IBJ Media publications. That's the Indianapolis Business Journal and Inside Indiana Business. And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter for all the latest news, and you can find us on social media.
Do you want the real scoop on what's happening in Indiana business? Check out the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King, and each week I sit down with people who make news in Indiana to get insights and perspectives you won't hear anywhere else. It's business, but you won't need an MBA. The guests run the gamut from CEOs, developers, and sports executives to artists and chefs and financial planners. If there's a theme, it's that everything has a cost. And success often depends on how you define profit and loss. So if you want to deepen your understanding of the people and projects shaping Indiana, give the IBJ Podcast a try. You can find it at ibjpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
The IBJ Media Podcast Network is the soundtrack of a growing state. Indiana is on the move, and you can hear it happening on the IBJ Media Podcast Network. We bring you the voices at the center of our economy, our courts, our companies, and our communities. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation that's building Indiana's future. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcasts.com.